what I do with it.
This man's like my son. I got to tell you what he did. This is not in my program tonight, but he and I were out there one day in the truck. And have y'all ever been out when the need to go hit you? Have any of y'all ever experienced that? Raise your hand if you've ever. Come on now, don't lie to me. Get him up in the air, man. It hit me, and I said, stop and let me out. And this wide open field, and I went running across one tree. And I get over there and drop my britches and hold on to that tree, and I hear this truck going, and he's riding around and around the tree taking pictures of me. That's the kind of friend he is. And I got a problem with Pam because I've told her this before. I whip people's butt for making my wife cry. And she did it again. Ross, where are you? Right there. I guarantee you she did it. I'm going to take you through a brief journey. And I want you to know that one of the greatest medicines you can take is laughter. And even better than that, being able to laugh at yourself. And I love to be around people who laugh easily. And I hope I can share some things tonight that regardless of what you have going on in your life, you could find an opportunity to laugh. I'm going to give you my 4 basic priorities in life. This will help you greatly. They are not my spiritual priorities. That's settled. If it's cold outside, I'm going to be warm in my house. If it's hot outside, I'm going to be cool in my house. I'm going to drink good coffee. I don't care how much it costs. And I'm going to buy real good toilet paper. Can y'all live with those? I get accused of hugging women all the time. I pastored 4 churches. I was here 28 years. Since I've been retired, I'm in my 12th interim that lasts about a year each. And everywhere I go, I hear, wish I was a preacher so I could hug all the women. And I heard it from a man right here one day. I just hugged his wife, and he didn't like it. He said, I wish I was a preacher so I could hug all of the women. And I want to tell you what I told him. Don't tell anybody, but it's got its disadvantages. You have to hug the ugly ones and the pretty ones. You don't get to pick and choose. The lady standing in line said, now I'm wondering which one I am. I said, oh, you're pretty. Come on here and give you a hug. Our first church was out from Cleburne, Texas, in a little community called the Freeland Highland community. And the church was a little white building. On a good Sunday, maybe 30 people were there. I didn't have a place to preach. A guy that they were supposed to vote on told me at church on Wednesday night, they want me, but I'm not going back down there. Do you want to go down there and preach for them? Go down there and preach for them and tell them I'm not coming. So I drive up in front of this little church, tell Rosalind, you might ought to stay home today, you know. And I drive up, and they're all standing out in the front of the church. And I said, Brother Jim said that he's not coming. And he told me, if I would, to tell you that. And I'd be happy to preach for you if you need me to. And they looked at each other and said, well, we got to have somebody. And so I preached for them that morning, that night. They asked me to come back. So I went back the next Sunday. took Roz with me. And in the afternoon, they had 3 deacons. 2 of them wouldn't speak to each other. And it was that kind of situation. And I met with the one that was the leader, and he said, "Do you want to be our pastor?" Is that my breathing on this thing? "Do you want to be our pastor?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And so I said, "How are we going to do it?" He said, "We don't have to do anything. I've talked to everybody. They want you to come." So we started going. I'd go down on Saturday, visit on the church field, drive back. Roz and I would go down on Sunday for Sunday morning, Sunday night. They was paying me $25 a week. I was driving 120 miles round trip twice. By the time I put my offering in, I was paying them a little bit to let me come preach. But I wanted to preach. I'd been down there on Saturdays about 3 weeks, and everybody kept asking me, "Have you met Grady Boone yet?" I said, "No." But I wondered why everybody was interested. Finally, I talked to somebody who told me, "Well, Grady has a problem. He cusses a lot. As a matter of fact, he could speak 5 words, and 4 of them probably be a cuss word." And the last preacher we had went to witness to him, and he cussed the preacher, and the preacher said, "Just go ahead and go to hell. I don't care," and left. And shortly thereafter, the pastor left. So I figured out it was important for me to meet Grady Boone. So I went down to the store his wife owned, and it was right where the road ended. And his truck was there. And I walked in, and I said, "Are you Grady Boone?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm Tom Whatley. I'm the new preacher up here." He said, "No, one of them blankety-blank chicken-eating preachers." And I said, "Yes, I got mine from eating chicken, but where did you get yours? From drinking that old nasty beer?" And he looked at me. And if you're going to be a successful preacher, you got to be able to read people's eyes. I looked him in the eye, and he looked at me, and what he was saying with his eyes was, "This old boy ain't normal." So I left, and the next week I went by the store, and when I started in, he had about 6 old dogs that would follow him everywhere he went. And one of the little old dogs bit me on my ankle as I was going into the store. I walked in and said, "Hey, Grady, your dog bit me." He explained to me that dog, in his own language, had a propensity for eating cow manure. And that's why it bit me. And I looked at him and I said, "Grady, I'm going to kill your dog." And he looked at me again. This old boy ain't normal. A couple of weeks later, I said, "I come down here every Saturday. If you're working your cattle," he was a rancher, "I love to ride horses. I'll be glad to go ride with you." He looked at me. He never had a preacher want to go ride with him. He said, "This old boy's not normal." The next Saturday, I showed up, and Grady and 4 men were sitting under a live oak tree about 40 yards from the store. I walked over to where they were and was about to sit down. And he said, "Preacher, you said," he's cussing all the time now, "Preacher, you said you wanted to ride. I got a horse here for you to ride." And I had been set up. I had one of 2 choices. I could be a fool and go get on that horse, or I could sit down and he would never listen to anything I said. So I walk over and I take the reins loose, and the old horse starts backing up and jerking around, and I get the reins over his head and get him up tight, and I get a foot in the stirrup, and I swing up in the saddle, and he starts bowing up, and I'm pulling his head up to keep him from bucking, and I didn't want him to buck me off right there in front of him, so I nudged him out, and we got on a little old gravel road, and he took off, and I was just going along for the ride. It went a quarter of a mile to the cemetery, and they had a fence around the cemetery and a big gate, and he's wide open, and I'm sitting up there thinking he's going to run right into that gate. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to get off, and I'm about ready to jump when he locks them up and slides right up to the gate. And he twirls around and takes off, going back the other direction. About halfway back, the horse gets winded. By the time I get back to the store, it's just trotting. And I ride up behind the store, wrap the reins around what he had him tied to. I could hardly walk. My knees were shaking so bad. I walked over and sat down, and I said, "Grady, all that horse needed was a good riding." He looked at me again, and I could read it. He's not normal. But then I learned something. That's all he had ever known. He was going everywhere. That's the best blankety-blank preacher we've ever had down here. That's all he had ever known. I couldn't get him in church. He just wouldn't come in church. He'd come up and sit on the tailgate of his truck out in the yard, the church, and I'd tell him, "Men, you raise the windows so he can hear me." And he'd sit out there. It was about time for us to leave. And he came and had a tear in his eye. He said, "I'm really going to miss you." He said, "Me and the wife like to travel. I already know where you're going in Alabama, and we're going to come to see you." And I'm thinking, Lord, what am I going to do with him when he comes? People won't understand that. 6 months after we were in Leeton, Alabama, I get a call that Grady Boone had given his heart to the Lord because somebody wasn't normal who would plant a seed and nurture it. And stuff I'm going to share with y'all tonight, some of y'all will say, "He just shouldn't have said that." But you can get over it, okay? You're going to change me around. You hear me now? Some of the funniest things that ever happened in my years of ministry had been in the most serious moments in church life, with baptisms, with the Lord's Supper, at weddings, and at funerals. And these were things that caused me to laugh. In the little church in Texas, there was a little lady about this tall. She and her husband had moved to that community and had a dairy for 40 years, and then he died, and she ran it for 15 years by herself after he had died. She was tough, tough, tough. Grady Boone, This big tough man, I'm telling you, he was scared to death of her. She was tough. She didn't put up with nothing. She liked me, but she loved Rosalind. She'd tell Rosalind, honey, anytime you come down here and on Sundays, you don't have to run around with him. There's a bed in here that's yours. You can come over and take you a nap. I'll have you something to eat, and you can just come here and relax, because it was the only day of the week Rosalind wasn't working. And they became good friends. And we were getting close to the end of the third year, and I knew I was coming back to Alabama and to Leeton. And one Sunday during the invitation, she comes down the aisle. Just blows me away. I said, Miss Frio, why are you coming? She said, I want to join this church. And I knew she was, because we talked. I said, Miss Frio, you're a Methodist. She said, well, you'd be surprised how much will rub off on you in 60 years. I said, well, you know, being a Methodist, that we Baptists want to baptize you again. She said, yeah, I know that. Would you let me do that? Well, yes. So we planned her baptism. I went down on the Brazos River on Saturday, had on some old clothes. I got out in that river and found a place that wouldn't be too deep on her. And we planned on going down to the river on Sunday and have her baptism. After church, we all met down there, sang some hymns. And y'all, this was the first person I'd ever baptized. I remember calling my daddy, that old preacher man, and I said, Daddy, would you tell me what you say when you baptize somebody? And he said, yes, son, in humble obedience to the command of the Lord and Savior, and upon your profession of faith in him, my sister, I now baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. I wrote it down. I memorized it. I was good to go. We get ready to go out in the water, and it looked a little different. We got out in it, and it felt a little different, because they were letting water through the dam, and it was swift. And I walk her out there and get her stable, don't know what I'm doing, never having done it before. I face this precious little woman downstream. And when I laid her back, she shot out of my hands. I mean, she was gone. She was screaming. Rosalind was running up and down the bank. Somebody help him. Somebody help him. He don't know what he's doing. Somebody help him. I finally caught her about 70 yards down the river, got where I could pick her up and just walk out with her. And during that process, I baptized her 7 times, and she baptized me 9. And she looked up at me and she said, how many people have you baptized? You're it. That was our precious, fun story. In Cleburne, Texas. We moved to L.A., Leeton, Alabama. I'm going to teach you something about being a good, successful minister. You have to learn how to create and utilize leverage. Some people call it blackmail. It's not blackmail if you don't ever intend to tell it. But just the fact that you know it is leverage. And we were eating with this family whose name will not be mentioned tonight. The statute of limitations has not run out. I could still be sued, I guess. But we were at the table, and all of a sudden, pow! And I said, what was that? It sounded like a gun going off in your house. Pow! Again. And then two in quick succession. Pow! Pow! I said, what's going on, man? There's something going on back there. He said, no, everything's. I said, oh, yeah, we got to check it out. No, yeah. And I went into their pantry, and it was a big place where they could store canned foods. And it just so happened that he was making wine. And I said to him, son, you don't know what you're doing. You're supposed to let the fermentation process get over before you cork it. And he looked at me like, he's not normal. But there never was a moment in that church life when we had to deal with some kind of decision that all I had to do was look at that old boy and he would hit the floor and support everything I wanted. Leverage. It happened at Central Baptist Church. I went to visit one of my little elderly ladies one day, and she saw me coming up to the screen door, and she jumped up and ran to the sink and started washing her mouth out. And I said, it's too late. I've seen you. She came to the door, and she said, Brother Watley, none of my preachers have ever known that I dip snuff. You haven't been here 3 weeks, and you've caught me. I said, well, hon, that's okay. If it'll make you feel better, I've been known to chew a little tobacco myself. And everybody that really knows me knows that. Don't you? Some of you self-righteous people may think it's wrong, but I'm not wormy. And I only do it on special occasions. Like today is Save the Whales Day. Did y'all know that? Matter of fact, if you look at your calendar, there are about 30 Save the Whales Day on your calendar, if you'll just check it out. But I caught her, and the leverage was there. And we would get in a business meeting. Y'all got to look carefully now. And I would just look over at her and go, and she'd hit the floor, ready to rumble. Leverage. When we moved to Leeton, we moved to a place where people really let us learn. Let me make mistakes. Learn how to be a pastor. I didn't know. They let me grow. They overlooked me in my failures. And they will tell you today, if you go out there and ask them, that they raised me. And they're kind of proud of it, and that makes me feel good. But while I was there, I had a lady that was a nurse. She came to see me pretty often because she just wanted to talk to me. Her name was Beck Ford. She and Morris were friends, and they had 4 big old boys that I loved. But she just come to talk, and if she could have a BT fix and just talk to me for about 30 minutes, and I'd just listen to her, and she'd get